Good morning, church. We're in a series called Made. And so 2 weeks ago, we learned that we were made for a purpose. And we learned that that purpose that we were made for is to be a child of God doing the mission of God. And then last week, if you were here, we learned that we were made to give away. And we learned that we were made to give away and that our giving comes from our thankfulness and how thankful we are for what God has already given to us. And as I think of being made in the image of God and living in a sinful world, a world full of sin and full of sinners, I can't help but think that we're made to handle pain. We're made to go through struggles. We are made to battle. Now, I haven't been here for very long. Matt said I've been here for about a month. It's pretty accurate. I've been here for about a month, and so I don't know a whole lot about the church yet, but something that I hear over and over and over again is that there's a lot of pain inside this room right now. That there's a lot of battles being fought inside this room right now. Everyone in here is fighting their own separate battle, going through their own struggles, going through their own hardship. Maybe for you, it's a battle that everybody in here knows about, and maybe everybody's rallying together, and you're all fighting it together. Or maybe for you, it's a battle that you keep losing behind closed doors. Or maybe for you, the battle that you're facing, the pain that you're going through is all in here, and it deals with your self-worth and your self-image and how you see yourself and view yourself. And so maybe the battle that you fight every day is against yourself and against how you view yourself. No matter who you are or what your job is, no matter how perfect your life may look on the outside, everybody in here is fighting a battle. Everybody in here is going through pain and struggle and hardship. Now, I don't want to come across as insensitive to your struggles and to your pain, because honestly, I haven't even been here long enough to know your guys' names, let alone your struggles. I don't know what you guys are going through, but I know you're going through something. My heart hurts for you. But I can't feel your pain because I'm not in your shoes. Whatever your pain is, whatever your battle is, whatever struggle you're going through, my guess is that your mind went to it right away. My guess is that you were able to think of it right away. Right? Because it's something that you struggle with every single day. It's a battle that you fight every day, every other day. It's a constant war. Now, just because I don't know your pain, that doesn't mean that I can't speak life into your pain. Because luckily for us, there's somebody in the Bible who, let me tell you, his resume is full of pain. I mean, it has pain written all over it. When you look at this man's credentials, and you talk about battle and struggle and hardship and pain, that this guy is at the top of the list. And so I'm going to read you his resume full of pain. The person I'm thinking of, this will be on the screen, he was in prison frequently, he was flogged, he was on the brink of death time and time again. 5 times this man received 39 lashes, and if you add that up, that's 195 total scars on his front and back from the whip marks. 3 times this man was beaten with rods, he was stoned once, shipwrecked 3 times, constantly on the move, no time to sleep, and he went without food and water often. Now who in here knows whose resume this is? Talk to me. Paul, right? And so this is Paul's resume of hardship. Now, I'll be honest, my very first thought when I saw this list, and my very first thought wasn't very pastorly. My very first thought was, Paul had to be one ugly dude. I mean, you're beaten, you have scars all over you, you're starving, no water, bags under your eyes from no sleep. Like, Paul was not an attractive dude. And that was my first thought, I'll be honest with you. My second and my more serious thought was that if there's anybody who can talk about pain and the battles that I'm facing, if there's anybody who can talk about the hardships that I'm going through and speak life into my battles and into my pain, then Paul's the man. He is more than qualified to speak life into your struggles. See, but this list of what Paul went through, this resume of pain that Paul went through, this isn't all that he went through. I mean, there was this special cherry on top of his resume. I mean, this one really stood out. There was something worse than all of that stuff combined. And so, but before we learn what that was, we have to understand something about Paul. Because he was an apostle and because he was chosen specially, like more specially than me or you is chosen by God, Paul had a little bit of privileges to him. I mean, God blessed him in ways that God doesn't necessarily bless us. One of those ways was that Paul was taken to heaven and able to see heaven in all of its glory. Now, we don't know if that means that God took his entire body and brought him to heaven, or if it was a vision or a dream of heaven, but somehow Paul got to see heaven in all of its glory. Now, I don't know about you, but if I saw heaven, I would be so conceited about it. I mean, I would start bragging like that little kid on the playground, like, ha ha, I got to see heaven, you didn't, and boo-boo. You know, I'd be like, God just must love me more. Hey, it's totally fine. It wouldn't be true, but that's where my head would go. I'd say, God, I'm chosen, I'm an apostle, I got to see heaven, and I would get so conceited. Now, before you just think that I'm an awful person, I want you to know that Paul was going to get conceited too. His head would have expanded a little bit because of this. And God knew that about Paul. And so God gave Paul this special gift, this special thing to make sure that Paul wasn't going to get conceited. Now, what this thing is, well, you'll learn in a second. But I want you to know it's bad. Like it's awful. And Paul really struggled with this thing. That's where we're at in our Bible today. 2 Corinthians chapter 12. If you have your Bible, you can flip there. If you have a smartphone, I'll trust you to get on the Bible app. Otherwise, it'll be on the screen. Again, that's 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7. We're going to start in the middle of verse 7 with the word therefore. Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, this is Paul speaking, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. So hold up, Paul. You're telling me that not only did you go through that entire list of awful stuff, but that there was more on top of it? And the way that Paul writes this stuff, the other stuff that I talked about, the shipwreck, the beating with rods, that's in chapter 11, if you want to go look at it later. But the way that he lists that stuff, it's just this, and this. You know, I was shipwrecked, I was starving, whatever. I was beaten, I was stoned. And it's just in a list. But the way that Paul has this thorn in the flesh separately, it tells us that this was seriously painful for Paul. I mean, the way that he has this separate, it shows us that this was worse than all of that other stuff combined. Paul had this thorn in his flesh. Sadly, we don't know what this thorn was. Some people say that this thorn was epilepsy, and so he'd get up and he'd start preaching the gospel to crowds, and then he'd have a seizure and he'd pass out, and then he'd wake up super embarrassed, and people would leave, and so he wanted to convert people, And so some people think that it was this epilepsy, and that's what his thorn in the flesh was. Other people suggest that maybe it was depression. And honestly, if I went through a shipwreck 3 times and was beaten and stoned and whipped, I would be depressed too. And so that's not uncommon. Some people think that it's his vision. Some people think that he couldn't see properly, and so writing the letters was hard for him. And so some people think that his thorn in the flesh was his vision problems. Other people suggest maybe since he didn't have a wife, maybe it was sexual temptation, and that could be. Other people think it was bad malaria. The parts of the country that he was in, malaria is super bad around there, and so some people think that, maybe malaria, other people think migraines, that there's a whole list of things that people think it could be. But we don't know. Now part of me, I'm a person, I just like to know stuff. Like, I just want to know. Like, I want to know where we're going, what time we're going, who's driving. I want to know everything, all the details. And so this kind of bugged me, like I want to know what Paul's thorn in the flesh was. But we don't know. And while part of me is like, yes, I want to know, there's another part of me that honestly is kind of glad that I don't know what it is. Let's just say, for example, that the Bible doesn't say that he was given a thorn in the flesh. Let's say, for example, that it says, therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given vision problems, a messenger of Satan to torment me. Now, if it said vision problems, I'd say, well, I have glasses. That fixes it. And so it doesn't apply to me. And so because it doesn't apply to me, I'll just read over it. Or fill in the gap with whatever you think it was, whether it was depression or epilepsy or malaria. I would read that and say, I don't have malaria. I can skip over that. But because he leaves it ambiguous, and because he leaves it as to we don't know, now we can relate. Because all of us have our own thorns in the flesh. We all have our own pain, and our own struggle, and our own hardship. I have my own thorn. My guess is you probably have yours too. So maybe for you, it's an emotional thorn. And maybe you struggle with depression. And you're trying to fight against anxiety. I mean, maybe for you, you're dealing with the death of a loved one. Maybe for you, it's past regret. And that's your thorn in the flesh. Or maybe it's not. Maybe it's not an emotional thorn. Maybe it's a relational thorn. Maybe for you, it's an unhappy marriage. And your marriage is on the ropes. And that relationship just isn't right. Maybe it's an unhappy work relationship. Maybe you don't get along with your boss. You don't get along with your coworkers. Maybe it's the fact that the relationship that's not right is the one with your kids. And you don't know how to discipline them. You don't know how to get them to behave. You don't know how to get them to love you more. And the relationship just isn't right. Or maybe it's not emotional and it's not relational for you. Maybe for you, it's a financial thorn. Maybe you hate your job, but you go to it just to pay the bills. I mean, maybe you're living paycheck to paycheck. And maybe you just have a ton of debt and you can never catch up. Or maybe thing after thing gets broken and you have to fix it, and broken, you have to put more money into it, and something else breaks and you have to put more money into it, and it's just time after time you have this financial burden. Maybe you're just flat out broke. And so you're struggling with that financial thorn in your flesh. Maybe it's not emotional, and maybe it's not relational, and it's not financial. Maybe the battle that you're facing is a physical thorn. So maybe you wake up every day dealing with disability. Maybe you have the pain of infertility, and you're struggling with the battle of miscarriage. Maybe for you, you're fighting cancer, and it's a physical thorn that is kicking your butt. You're dealing with migraines, or you have chronic pain or arthritis or any physical thorn. And so maybe for you, it's a physical thorn. Now, I don't have to tell you guys what your thorn is. My guess is that your mind went to it right away. Right? Because it's a battle that you fight every single day, day in and day out, maybe by the hour. Maybe you're fighting this by the minute. And if you're like me, or if you're like Paul, my guess is that you've prayed to God, and you've said, God, take this away from me. I'm tired of it. God, take this from me. I don't want it anymore. I don't want this depression. I don't want this anxiety. I don't want the cancer. I don't want the infertility. God, fix it. And Paul prays that same prayer about his thorn. Let's see what he says in verse 8. This is Paul speaking. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. So some of you in here, this verse is all that you need. The only thing that you needed was to hear that God's grace is enough for you, that his grace is sufficient for you. And so no matter what depression or past regret or unhappy marriage or living paycheck to paycheck, God's grace is enough for you to get you through this pain, to get you through this battle. God's grace is enough. And now, that doesn't mean that the depression goes away. Doesn't mean that tomorrow you're going to wake up and be cancer-free. I don't want you to mishear me. God is more than capable of healing. He is more than capable of fixing any ruined relationship that you have. He is more than capable of fixing whatever you are going through. But sometimes he doesn't. And so how do we respond when God doesn't fix it? He did Paul's thorn away. Paul dealt with it for his entire life. You know, and you'll hear those preachers, those preachers who stand on the stage and say, you know, if you just pray harder and you pray longer and you pray with more faith, then God will heal you. That's simply not true. I mean, maybe in some cases it is, but as a general rule, you're telling me we're supposed to have more faith than Paul? Paul prayed 3 times for his thorn to be taken away. And that's not just like 3 days. That's 3 seasons of his life. That he begged and pleaded with God, God, take it away. I don't want it anymore. And God said, no. And you're telling me that we're supposed to have more faith than Paul. Paul, one of the best people to ever walk this earth. I could argue that Paul had more faith than all of us in this room combined. I mean, you can't out-faith God and just convince him, well, I have more faith now, so you should fix it. It doesn't work like that. And some of us are getting to the age in our life where we're figuring out that we have to learn how to serve God with the depression. We're figuring out that we have to learn how to serve God and how to be faithful to God even though we're going through struggle and hardship and pain and cancer and disability and bad relationships and bad marriage problems. That we have to learn how to be faithful even though we have a thorn. Because God never promised that it was going to be easy. Paul prayed 3 times that it be taken away from him, that he didn't want it anymore, that God needed to fix this. And God said, no, my grace is sufficient for you. My grace is enough for you. My power is enough for you. My forgiveness is enough for you to get you through this hard time. God says, my presence in your life will get you through this battle, will get you through this pain, will get you through this hardship. God says, am I not enough for you? But God, if you're really bigger than my struggles and bigger than my pain, if you're really that big, why wouldn't you take it away? Don't you love me? And God says that his glory needs a backdrop. A flashlight isn't nearly as effective in the middle of the day. He needs our darkness to show how bright he really is. His glory needs a backdrop. His power needs to be shown through your weakness. Your weaknesses and how small we are show how big our God is. I mean, if I get through the storm, praising him in the middle of the storm, then he gets all of the glory for getting me through that, for strengthening me through that. And it's not because the storm isn't bad. And it's not because the pain that you're dealing with isn't bad. It isn't hard. The battle isn't tough. It's not saying that. But it's because when God is with you every step of the way, and he sees you through to the other side, then you can get through. See, God gave Paul his thorn in his flesh because Paul needed that. Paul needed that to stay humble. Paul needed that to praise God, to show how big God was. Paul needed a weakness to show God's strength. Let me put it this way. If you aren't understanding it right now, if I like to weight lift, right? And some of my friends will ask me about how to weight lift better. Now, if I were to take a puny friend and I were to give him a program, and he were to start lifting on my program, and he got super jacked, then people would be like, hey, that was good weightlifting. But if I take somebody who's already strong, if I take Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, or I take Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I say, hey, lift on my program, and then he turns out strong, it's not because my program was so great. It's because he's a genetic freak. I mean, he was already strong. And so I did nothing to make him strong. He was already strong. In the same way, God uses our weaknesses to show how strong he really is. You look through the Bible, and you see example after example of this. I mean, Moses had a stuttering problem. And he proclaimed to Pharaoh that you need to set my people free. Let my people go, Pharaoh. And God used Moses even though he had a stuttering problem. God used Jacob, and Jacob was a big liar. And I can attest to that. Every Jacob you know is probably a liar. All right? God used Rahab even though she was a prostitute. And God used her for his greater good. God used Elijah even though he was suicidal. God used David, and he had an affair, and he was a murderer. And he still called David a man after God's own heart. God used Peter even though he denied him 3 times. God used Lazarus, and he was dead. God loves to use weakness to show his strength. And it's not because any of these people were such great people, because they weren't, all right? But it's because God's presence there with them, what was enough to get them through their struggle and their hardship. Because God being there beside them in the middle of their struggles, in the midst of their struggles, it was enough for them. And I want to tell you that God's presence is enough for you. His grace is sufficient for you. Because when we're weak, it shows God's strength. Let's finish up our reading, second half of verse 9. Therefore, this is Paul again, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. That statement seems like such a paradox. When we're weak, then we're strong. And honestly, it is kind of a paradox. And I don't know how to explain it to you if you've never been there. But God being beside you in the middle of your battle is enough to get you through. His grace is sufficient for you. His love is enough for you. His power will get you through. His presence strengthens you. Now, being strong doesn't mean you grit your teeth and you hone in and you battle through your pain with no help from anybody. No. Being strong when you're weak means that you let God's strength be shown through your weakness. His glory needs a backdrop. It means that God being with you is enough to get you through your battle. I think of this old-time song, and I think of it, and it says, I'd rather walk in the dark with Jesus than walk in the light on my own. God's presence is enough to strengthen you through your pain. Psalm 23:5 says, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil. For you are with me, Lord. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. I hope that you learn to surrender to God and that you let His strength shine through your weaknesses. I pray that you let Him strengthen you to battle through your pain and to battle through your darkest of valleys. I hope that you feel His presence strengthening you so that you really fear no evil, because God is enough for you. God is enough to get you through your battle. I pray that in the middle of the battle that you face every single day, that you know that God's presence is right beside you and that it is enough to get you through your pain. When we're going through a hard time, God is there with us. And if you remember nothing else from my sermon, if you only remember this one thing, I want you to remember this. God's presence gives us strength to battle through our pain. God's presence gives us strength to battle through our pain.